Hello, my name is Jessica Pruitt, and I would like to walk you through my transformation through cultural response strategies working with diverse students. Here, this graphic I created on Wordle incorporates some of my favorite words from this whole semester. My favorite word here is the largest and also in the center, and that's because student-centered learning is number one. Together, we can also create one classroom. We've all been working with a collection of diverse students whose needs vary. And even though we all come from different backgrounds, have different experiences, personal likes, and interests, I do believe teachers and students can create together one classroom. Other things that teachers should remember are our students' experiences. We should push them, understand previous knowledge, create lessons that are relatable to students, allow learning, understand that students have different needs, and see them at their best. I'd like to begin with week one, when we were first introduced to two teachers, Eric and Regina, who share their stories and journeys as teachers in the book Teaching with Vision by Christine Sleether and Catherine Kornblath. Now, these first chapters are very fitting for us as first-time teachers because they address the many stereotypes and misconceptions about becoming a teacher. Sleether says in her introduction that we've created this book primarily for new teachers, especially those who may be working in a less than ideal or supportive circumstance. And Sleether's ideas are heavily spoken firsthand by the countless teachers in this book who speak about the challenging work educators face in a diverse classroom on so many different levels. Now, it's been very interesting hearing from my classmates speak about their practicum experiences this semester. Some schools are very homogeneous racially and linguistically, but their students' learning profiles are anything but the same, yet often they're taught under an identical format. Why is this? The culture of my practicum school is anything but homogeneous. It's very diverse, and I love learning from my students and being a part of what feels like an international learning community. The students in my biology and physical first classroom are all students who have been in the U.S. either from birth or for over a year. And some are native born Americans who speak English as a first language, whereas others are fluent in Spanish, Arabic, Swahili, Mandarin, French, Portuguese, or any of the other 43 languages spoken by students or faculty at my practicum high school. Not only are the linguistics spoken and the culture of my students diverse, but so are the learning and readiness of the individuals. Now, some students learn best through visual images and analogies, whereas others learn by writing, reading, and taking notes. And regardless of their learning profile, all students want a hands-on experience that is meaningful and relatable to what they experience every day. My culture growing up was very different than the students I work with. I grew up in western Kansas, where I attended a high school that was heavily supported by rich oil money. So my high school really never lacked resources due to the generous community who worked to make education and opportunities for children a number one priority in my small rural town. I don't remember taking high stakes testing in high school other than maybe a math exam my sophomore year, but it did not seem to be as heavily emphasized as they put on our students today. I see the administration at my practicum reaching out and helping students achieve post-high school success with programs such as their A-plus program, which, if you're unfamiliar with, it requires students to attain a certain GPA and earn an amount of community service hours in exchange for paying for an amount of their college tuition. The community around my practicum high school, it really varies. And the influences of students in their lives is much different than the community that I experienced growing up. At times, it's very supportive when you see collaborations through UMKC, but then there are other leaders and volunteers who really seem non-existent in my students' lives. And my students have such great character and they work so hard. They really do need people to guide them academically and personally so that they can succeed and get out of this pattern of poverty that they sometimes see at home or among their peers. What I do see in my students that reminds me of them at their age is I wanted a teacher who understood me and really appreciated my individual and uniqueness. I thought very differently than the small town people I grew up with. And I really wished I had a teacher who thought like that and who really listened and showed personal concern for my well being. And I see those characteristics expressed in my CMT. And even if the students sometimes don't like his teaching strategies, they always respect him and they always know that he is expressing concern for their best needs. And that's something I really admire from him and something that I've learned and always want to incorporate with my students when I become a full time teacher as well. So, what I knew going into this class was my passion for students, my passion for science, respecting others, and empathy. I always like to use humor in difficult and frustrating scenarios because we know laughter is the best medicine. And in high school, I really didn't like science, so it's kind of ironic that I'm teaching science now. But I know how difficult and how frustrating it is. I became very frustrated learning, especially in genetics and cell biology. It's very difficult to learn. But I do believe if you have a great teacher who can break it down and explain it in its simplest form, you can really create some students who have a love of science. And we need more students who are interested with the growing STEM careers. What I have learned in this class, though, is how important it is to know my students' culture and to really rearrange the curriculum and my lessons so that I can create meaningful lessons that allow them to connect content to be more accessible and relatable to their previous experiences. So I strongly believe that students become more engaged and interactive and invested in learning if they can relate it to something that they already understand, whether it's society, personal culture knowledge, using metaphors and images to bridge any kind of gaps that may arise between what they see outside of school to any kind of new knowledge being presented in the classroom. I personally love using food analogies. That's always my go-to because many students have experience or can visualize food and can gather that metaphor being described. So if I were to stand in front of a classroom and talk about single replacement chemical reactions, I can guarantee you all of you listening right now have just completely tuned out because that's so boring. So instead of being boring, I want to show, or I did show in one of my classrooms, a fun Flintstones video on YouTube that I found which explained the different types of chemical reactions, and it used the metaphor incorporating the characters of the Flintstones and them attending a dance, which I thought was very cultural relatable because they're teenagers. They have all been to a high school dance or no prom. So the fact that they can use a kind of a dating relationship prom analogy allowed them to really connect and understand what's going on. So after the video, we had a discussion and we created our own analogy. As a class, we decided making cookies is a lot like a synthesis reaction. So synthesis means creating. So it's a reaction where you're creating something. So when you combine two reactants, so we'll say eggs is one reactant and flour is another reactant, you make in a reaction a brand new product, which would be our cookies. And they really like that. So then after our discussion, we gave them a variety of assignments that they could do. So we told them, hey, you can either using complete sentences create your brand new analogy, or you can use illustrations like they did in the video, or you can do a Venn diagram over an additional concept we talked about, which was exothermic and endothermic. So I'm going to share one of the examples a student created. So he was talking about decomposition reactions. Decomposition means breaking down. So he said, me and my girlfriend are dating, which means we make up one reactant together. So imagine a boy and girl together. All right, one day we decide to break up. So the two reactants split apart and we go through a reaction. And we end up broken apart into two new products or now two new single people. So that was one example they could use that they could relate to their own lives, which I really liked. Another student decided to use a visual analogy. So I'm going to show you a replica of what it looked like. So a double replacement, it's when you have two partners, these guys, and then they break up and then they get new partners. We'll just say that, whatever. So the heart and the star were together, the X and the O. They go through reaction. Now the heart is with this little guy, the O, and the X is now with the star. So that's another fun way that they can learn the material. Instead of doing AB plus CD, blah, 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 boring, we like to make it a little bit more fun. And I also think when you're having fun, you remember things much more better. All right, going back to this, what changed me most throughout this class really was my ideas and knowledge on differentiated instruction. Going into this class, I would always ask professors and teachers, what is differentiated instruction? Because I'd hear it all the time and I had no idea what it was and how to even implement it in my classroom. And my biggest fear was, well, how am I going to teach a gifted student who is smarter than me? What can I do to keep them challenged? So in Carol Tomlinson's book, How to Differentiate Instruction in Mixed Ability Classrooms, to me that was a miracle. I'm not a big book reader, but you should all be proud of me because I read this book and I really enjoyed it and I thought it had wonderful examples and it really broke down the do's and don'ts and it just got straight to the point and I like that. I like that it had the facts and the myths and what it really means to differentiate instruction. I previously thought DI was just giving harder tasks or more complex questions to students who needed it and then kind of giving easier stuff to students who needed more additional practice based on perceived abilities. And Tomlin describes this on page 3. Don't do that. Just stop. That's a misconception and you shouldn't do that because that's not what DI is about. DI shouldn't be busy work. DI is about acknowledging that your students learn at different speeds and that their abilities will differ depending on the concepts taught. Which makes complete sense because in some classrooms, some concepts and let's give an example of genetics. Maybe I'm taking a genetics test and this idea about something doesn't make sense. But then the next unit we start, I completely get it. It doesn't mean that I'm not intelligent or that I'm not capable or I don't have high abilities. It just means either my previous knowledge or maybe my interest isn't there. So we should really acknowledge that our students' abilities can differ depending on their readiness, their learning profile, and their personal interests. But we should never assume that a student is in one category just because of our perceived abilities of them, because we will probably be wrong. The best way really to define DI, and what I will always remember in my lesson planning, is to give students options, allow them to be responsible for their own success, let them to express themselves, and give students a variety of ways to show their mastery of skills. Now, I say this often to my science education friends, but how often do we take a test and think, wow, I studied so hard, I thought I knew all the material, and then I get the test and every question they asked me, I had no idea what they were talking about, and it didn't allow me to show them what I learned. If only I was allowed to prove what I learned that makes, in a way that makes sense to me in my learning style, I would have aced it. To me, multiple choice tests are not a one-size-fits-all. I don't want to use them as the only form of summative assessment. I feel like they have their time and place, but your students aren't the same. And as Professor Marks and I joked, if you can go to Subway and create a sandwich that matches your wants, why can't your education match your needs as well? So if anything, I will continue to push for myself, my students, and also other educators to really give your students the ability and chance to show you what they've learned. Don't just give them a multiple choice test that you got from a book and think that's going to allow them to prove to you what they've learned. Change the way that you approach content, processes, and products. So going back to my fear of how am I going to teach gifted students, well, Tomlinson gracefully addresses this issue when she talks about students who are used to getting A's are going to put in as little effort as they can to get that, or they're going to have a lot of high anxiety and expectations from parents or the community or other teachers to get those A's. So you really need to push their boundaries and give them high expectations, but be very clear and direct as to what those expectations are. And to remember that as you increase those expectations, make sure you increase your support as well, because you need to motivate them and push their self-efficacy and allow them to really get out of the comfort zone and take intellectual risk. And she really addresses that well on page 10 when she's talking about pushing the ceiling of expectations so that they can really match their full potential. And really, I'm just so happy because I feel more comfortable now knowing that I have these tools that I can use to teach gifted students. And I myself in high school really struggled more with science because I had a lack of motivation and a lack of teacher expectation. And I didn't really have anyone who really saw me as being more and who wanted to push me to try harder. So I believe because of my experiences and wants in a teacher as a struggling student, I'll be able to help the students who do struggle and need a little bit more guidance because I can use my previous knowledge as well. So to sum it up, I can now put a label on the teaching philosophy I've held really close to my heart for now a long time. So I'm truly thankful for this class and for these textbooks, which have given me the knowledge to apply multiple strategies to increase my students' success. And I believe this will allow me to use the information to create a learning environment that will really benefit my students individually and as a classroom as a whole.